So out of these conversations that I've had over the last 2.5 years, there's a term that I've been hearing a lot, unconscious bias. And when I first thought about it, I thought, yikes, I hope nobody asks me what that is, because I have no idea. And then I heard the term implicit bias, and kind of like when you've never seen a car before and you learn about a car and then you see them everywhere, all over the road. This is what happened to me with this term, unconscious bias, implicit bias. And I began to realize that, or wonder whether implicit bias was really the source of a lot of the isms that we have in this world. Racism, sexism, ageism, Islamophobia-ism, things like that. And so I decided to look into whether or not there'd be a film here to be made. One of the most interesting things that I learned about bias is that, as David Rock, who's a psychologist, explains it to me, it's like you can't do 2 math problems in your head at once, right? We have the inability to see bias in ourselves. And you can't believe how many people I interviewed that said, no, I'm open-minded, I'm not biased. So what about your friends and family? Are they biased? Oh, definitely. True, it's really interesting. It's really interesting. So I was interested also in the difference between bias and, say, racism, bias and sexism. And Majran Banaji, who co-authored the IAT, the Implicit Association Test. Has anybody ever taken the Implicit Association Test? Couple hands, not many. It's online. So you can look it up and take it online. It's fascinating. You can test yourself on where your biases are. And it's surprising. In the film, in Bias Film, I actually expose my own biases. I figured as a privileged white woman, who am I to be making a film about this unless I become vulnerable and show that I have biases? And I reveal some biases some that are somewhat shameful and others that completely, totally surprised me. You want to believe that's not true, right? I mean, you really want to think, well, where does that come from? Is that societal messaging? Because obviously I'm not explicitly acting that way. And it led me to think, well, wait a minute then, what about other unconscious biases that I have? And if I'm not explicitly preferring, say, whites to blacks, am I implicitly doing that? And what's the difference? So there are a couple things that I've learned in the last couple years about how you can try to increase diversity in interviewing. And one of them is diversifying the interview panel. So rather than just having one person do the interviewing or 2 people that happen to be sort of like-minded, find a really diverse group at your companies and get them, all of them interview, and ask the same questions to everybody. Force yourself to ask the same interview questions to everybody. Check everybody's references the same way. What I do recognize, and I think is important to recognize, is that men and women are different, thank goodness. That's part of what makes the world go around. And there was an interesting study that was done, I believe this was done at the Clayman Institute, but they took 10 qualifications for a job. And they showed it to both men and women. And women didn't want to apply for that job unless they had 9 to 10 of the qualifications. In other words, 90 to 100%. Men applied with confidence with 6 out of 10. Dude, I got this nailed. Really excited about being able to get that job. So women and men are different in that way, and this comes into negotiating. It comes into negotiating our salaries, it comes into negotiating our jobs, it comes into the promotion trajectory. It comes into whether we actually consider ourselves ready to move up. Often what happens is pay gaps are perpetuated because people will just say, well, we'll give you a 20% increase. How much were you making in your previous job? Well, great, we'll give you a 20% increase or a 10% increase. So another thing that companies are doing, I'm learning, is not basing anything on what the salary was before from a previous company, but saying this is what that position is paid here at this company. And it's a way to try to rectify. And by the way, it's something that you need to stay on top of all the time. And it's not just gender, right? It's racial inequity in pay as well. So I wanted to take some of this film outside of just the corporate world. I felt like it was important to bring this to a larger audience and have it relate to people. So one of the ways that gender bias seemed most interesting to me and really blatant was with the women US soccer team. So I don't know how many of you followed them, but the women's soccer team in the US, I think, won 4 gold medals. They've been incredibly successful. The male soccer team has not had the same success, and yet they get paid. They're paid differently. One is paid per game, and the other is paid sort of salary. Women are more salary. But if you look at it and try to compare them equally, the women have a much worse situation. This is something that worries me a little bit, and you see it all the time, right? Think about, I don't want to bring this political, but when you think about some of the judgment that was passed during the last election, I think you see that Hillary was often called shrill. My mom said to me, oh, she's just, I don't know, I just don't like her. I just can't vote for her. I thought, wow, really? She says, I can't vote for him either, but I can't vote for her. And there's this likability factor going on there too. So the more a woman is assertive and stands up and believes in something strongly, the less likable she is. And I think that's really problematic and very sad. And when you think about one of the reasons why women might not be rising up to the C-suite, why don't they stay in the C-suite? Why aren't they in the boardrooms as much? Hard to be in a boardroom if you don't have the 5 years of qualifying CEO experience or C-level experience that they're looking for, right? And why aren't there more in the C-suite? And I really think it has a lot to do with microaggressions and this type of thing. Because it gets tiring and it wears on women when they realize that people around them just don't like them as much if they have to be assertive, if they have to prove that they have earned to be in that room, earned their space in the room. So I was fascinated by this thing that's been called the mommy penalty. And it happens in a couple of different ways. But what we realize is that in most companies, especially in tech, a lot in VC, there's a certain amount of judgment that happens, not just from men, from women too. But when a woman becomes a mom, lots of people try to hide their pregnancy, right, early on. And then once women are moms, it's interesting the assumptions that we make. If a woman isn't at her desk at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or if she leaves a meeting sometime around 4:30, the assumption that everybody makes often is, oh, she's got to go pick up her child. She's got to go take the kid to soccer. If a man isn't at his desk at 4:30 or 5, or if he gets up to leave a meeting, the assumption is he's got to take a business call, he's going on a trip. These are really subtle things, right? But what happens when it's time for the promotion? In your mind, you think, oh, well, wait a minute, she's a mom. She's probably, needs to leave early. She probably can't take on that extra thing, that extra bit of work. So through all of this, I started thinking, okay, if you're human, you're biased. We all have it. If we have a brain, we're going to be biased. How do we get over ourselves? What is the answer? How do we create a society that is objective and fair? Well, maybe it's artificial intelligence. I got really excited about this at first. I thought, oh my God, this is pretty cool. Maybe artificial intelligence, everybody's terrified of, maybe it can be this sort of super solution that we're all looking for. Can it be completely objective? But unfortunately, what I learned is that artificial intelligence is already biased. No, it's true. It's really, really scary. So there are several ways that bias is working its way into artificial intelligence. Okay? One is just malicious intent. Did anybody follow Taybot? So Taybot is a chatter bot that was supposed to emulate the way a teenage and 19-year-old, American girl talks. And she was created so that it had machine learning, and she would learn from human interactions. Uh-oh. Within 16 hours, Tay was saying horrible things like, Hitler is great, and I hate feminists, and really, really bad things. So Microsoft quickly took Tay down, right? And took her off the internet. I think she left by saying, "Time to go, humans. So many interesting conversations today. Thanks." Smiley face. But I mean, shame on Microsoft. Imagine that. I mean, apparently they had tested the product in China before, and the assumption that what worked in China would work in the United States is a stretch in my mind. But pretty interesting that that they launched this and never thought about malicious intent. How easily somebody could just start putting, garbage in, garbage out, putting garbage into the system, knowing how it was going to learn, and that comes out. The other way that bias is working its way into artificial intelligence is just through sloppiness. So you can data input, you make a mistake. And then once that data is in there, how do you reverse it? Who even knows, except that the results might be skewed? And then, of course, we perpetuate our own biases. So we might not think we're biased, we all think we're not biased, and yet our own judgment is going into the creation of some of these algorithms. Do you want artificial intelligence to reflect society as it is today, with the gender differences and the biases that exist? Or do we want it to reflect an ideal society of 50-50 that we hope to make it to? I'm all about technology. I think it could really help us in a lot of ways. I think it can help us diagnose disease. And I think the perfect pairing is having human and artificial intelligence together. But I am a little concerned about the bias that's working its way into that. There are things that I haven't shared with you that are in the film because I want to entice you to see it when it's ready. We've just applied to a few big film festivals. We're adding voiceover. As I said, I'm sort of reluctantly agreed to be a subject, a character in the film. So that's been an interesting journey for me. I went to Barcelona and I subjected myself to some studies where they're looking at virtual reality and whether or not that can help us get over some of our biases. So I was in virtual reality when I looked down and saw that I was black, and saw how that changed some of my associations and behavior. I also went to Spokane, Washington. We filmed in a deadly force police simulator and talked to people about how is bias in policing and can we mitigate that. So some really, really interesting things. It's been a fabulous project for me, and I really look forward to premiering it, hopefully soon. Thank you for having me back. I look forward to screening the film with you when it comes out. Thank you so much.